Hey there, what's up everyone? My name is Flying Fox Girl and I am the unofficial fairy queen. Just call me Titania because every man that I fall in love with is an ass. Jokes aside, my exes are lovely and so is making new fairies, so let's dive into the nightmare realm of Pixie Hollow, aka Irish, Scottish, and Welsh mythology. Alright, so let me make a defense for why a 22-year-old woman is still drawing fairies. When I was about 16, I joined my first ever D&D game and had no idea what the canon race was. So, when I asked to play a fairy, my DM was just like, yeah, sure, we can make that work. See, a lot of the media that I was consuming at the time revolved around Tir na Nog and the Land of the Fairies and all sorts of stuff such as The Willow Maiden by Everton and Celtic Women's many folk hits. I was also obsessed with the works of Tom Moore and Cartoon Saloon, if any of you know any of those movies, and that was introduced to me by my then girlfriend and still long-term best friend, Julie. The world of selkies, magic songs, and monstrous horses that wanted to drag you down into the depths of a lake consumed my games from then on out. This was also coupled with the fact that I got to visit all three previous mentioned countries, two of which I toured while playing Dayful, my fairy bard. Fairy tales seemed to be built into the rocky walls around Killarney National Park, so while I was there, I had the privilege of buying one or two little touristy fairy tale books. Now, all of this is to say that I have a major appreciation for the history behind fairies, but the fairies that I draw aren't entirely historical. See, a fairy by nature is less a creature and more a descriptive term used to describe a sort of ambivalent physical spirit. They're usually separated from our world by a veil, but that veil can be pulled aside during Samhain or Halloween and through a myriad of portals such as fairy doors and fairy circles. Different scholars have different ideas and criteria for what fits a fairy, but since fairies were mainly stories used to explain certain phenomena, that gives artists and writers a lot of room to come up with their own fairy species. Now, I recognized a handful of historical fae creatures within my own storytelling, such as banshees, kelpies, selkies, changelings, pukas, etc. I reimagined them as slightly more monstrous and alien-like creatures to show how terrifying fairies could be, especially to early European societies, in German, Balkan, and Nordic myths as well. But the general idea we get is that fairies were powerful beings. Some could cause good luck and good fortune to humans, and even some were women and witches who were described as being fairies, but in reality, many fairies were supposedly bad omens and bringers of misfortune. They were something to be feared, respected, and appeased if not avoidable. In my TikTok storytelling, I often explore this dynamic through a relationship between a fairy and a fairy hunter. I set my own stories in a mythical world where society has advanced, but the early medieval fear of fairies continues to persist as the fairies are very real to their world. It's an interesting setting to explore, and one that I was lucky enough to gain a decent amount of funding for through a Kickstarter. Regardless, I like to make new species for this world, so I wanted to show you my design process and how I come up with fae species. Alright, so let's get into it. In nature, species develop to fulfill niches in the ecosystem and food chain. In a fairy world where so many of your natural predators are bigger and more magically powerful than you, this leads to highly specialized niches in the evolutionary chain. I base my designs off of certain existing fauna and flora in our world because, well, fairies are most often tied to the natural world and commonly receive their powers and their motifs from it. In my headcanon, this can help with camouflage, but it can also help with creating a unique look with recognizable patterns and builds. For today's fairy, I decided to call my new fairy species the Bachashi, or bee fairy. Excuse my bad Irish, by the way, I am not a native speaker, I only know the words that I need. I based this fairy's original concept off of European wasps, but then later switched to the African killer bee and rattlesnakes. My reasoning for this is that I don't have many fairies in my world yet who populate hotter climates, nor ones whose purpose and abilities are directly related to poison or stinging. I have rose fairies and changelings who produce thorns, but the idea of this little lady stinging with her nails and her fangs is both terrifying and adorable. Now, for my species, I tend to get inspiration from insectoids. The reason for that is while insects are very natural to our world, they tend to feel very off-putting and eerie with their big eyes and stretched limbs. Since people often imagine fairies with wings, it also gives more exploration for wing structure. For my little bee fairy, I drew inspiration from hornet wings, obviously. In my world, fairies often tend to appear as matriarchies, similar to ants, bees, mantises, and spiders. So what better fairy to draw than the queen bee herself? I've been watching a lot of Queen Charlotte recently, so I was really inspired by that late 1700s hairstyle that they incorporated, and I thought that height would just be fantastic for a beehive reminiscent hairdo. Now, about the tail. Why did I choose to incorporate a rattlesnake? Well, when designing new species, it's important to consider things like culture. For me, I often like to focus on song and dance in fairy culture, as it's how I imagine much of the courtship develops, and it's the skills that are used most often in a social setting. Bees, of course, are fantastic dancers, as most of us know by now, but I wanted to add something to their anatomy that could emphasize the importance of both their courtship and their defense mechanisms. For me, rattlesnakes were the perfect secondary choice because a rattle offers this fairy the ability to give off a warning alarm or a display of dominance, as well as add an additional limb to use in the act of mating, or more so, mating dances. I imagine that these fairies use their rattle to accompany their song and their dance, and when two bees become fully mated, they intertwine tails and perform their dance together. Fairies in this world also tend to receive their individual names from the local flowers that they protect or represent, so these fairies tend to decorate themselves with the flora of their namesake when attempting to woo a partner. Of course, they also have their cute little antennae with their blossoming flowers on it, because fairies in my world can also grow flowers on their own bodies. I just thought it was a fun addition. It's a part of their anatomy. These flowers can release different pollens or pheromones to help attract partners or scare away predators. And don't you go being gross, horny Twitter. Back off. I know what you guys think whenever someone says pheromones. Anyways, honestly for me, I just love combining natural elements to create something supernatural that resembles us humans. Insects, flowers, and animals all have a wide variety of interesting pollination techniques and colonies and social structures, and for me, I wanted to emphasize a fairy's connection to that environment while making them still feel foreign to our world. Also, fairies don't come in one size here. While these little guys might be cute as a subspecies of pixies at about 6 inches, think about how much more terrifying the implications would be if these guys were 6 feet tall. Imagine how massive an alien that flowering plant that makes her dress must look like in the Fae realm. It'd be like walking into Cotton Candy Pandora and getting eaten by a daylily. Well, I think I've rattled on long enough, so there we have it. The Bahashi, or bee fairy, or Adderkin. I thought that was a cute one too. These guys tend to be on the more intelligent side of Fae species with a focus on the hunt. Their venom allows them to stun their prey, and their rattles and flowers aid them in the search of procuring a mate. I hope this was fun to watch, and maybe it gave you some fun ideas about your own spirit or fairy species you could make. Honestly, I just want to see more exploration. I would hate to see artists and writers get cut down because they feel like they can't be original with their work because they're afraid of getting corrected. And in reality, when you add your own creative twist, you make something new, you make something that's your own. And as long as you're doing it respectfully and your intention is never to hurt a community, I want to encourage you to explore your creativity, explore your options, make something new. And please, make sure to check out my Kickstarter for Gossamer Wings if you're interested at all in this world. And please have a good day, my beloved rats.